morning. This is Michael with Fink Buys Houses, and I've got Cameron here with Emerson Property Management. Today we're going to talk about evictions. But before we get started, just to introduce myself real quick, I'm Michael with Fink Buys Houses. I'm a licensed agent and also a real estate investor. I buy houses, fix them up, and rent them. And Cameron, tell us what you do.
Yeah, my name's Cameron, founder of Emerson Property Management. I'm a house buyer turned property manager. So bought up a lot of houses and then had to find a way to manage them. So now I have Emerson Property Management, managed properties in greater Houston area.
Cool. And you got them also in Ohio, right?
Yeah, we do management. Well, I only manage my own properties in Ohio. But yeah, it's a different market, all student rentals. So a lot more intensive, totally different. Laws and local regulations. So, but yeah, it's good. Midwest, it's a good diversification between Midwest and Houston.
Yeah, you don't have hurricanes to deal with.
Yeah, the insurance is low. The property taxes are low. I think I would say Texas is definitely more business friendly, but no, it's been a good diversification.
Yeah, well, good. Well, I mean, you mentioned Texas being more business friendly, and we'll probably be able to touch up on that because evictions here in Texas are easier than the national average, I hear.
Yeah.
So
I've never had to evict in Ohio, thankfully, knock on wood. But man, I've heard California taking 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
I've heard some horror stories in Ohio. Definitely the New York's, Illinois, Chicago area. But yeah, man, I've done it several in Texas. And usually once they get that notice from the eviction of the actual attorneys or the JP court that, hey, you are due in court, here's your court date, typically they leave. I can't say immediately, but we'll go back and we try to check the property before the court date just to save the court's time and money. And we'll just say, hey, yeah, they're gone, they're vacated, and we'll start changing locks and pulling some stuff out. So yeah, thankfully that we haven't had long drawn out processes, but I've heard it's crazy in some other areas.
Yeah, I know. It would make investing a whole different game if it really became more difficult. I probably wouldn't.
2, 3, 4 times security deposit. That's what we have to do.
Is that what they do in California?
Well, I don't know, but I'm just thinking the only way to prevent that, if somebody's going to try to skip out on last month's rent or, take forever to evict them, I would just get a massive security deposit. I don't know how else you would do it.
But then it's probably regulated too.
No, that's probably true.
So.
Yeah, rent's regulated, security deposit probably regulated.
I have heard though, from our mutual contact Scott, he mentioned that there's with rent control, there's a way to you can actually possibly make more money in a rent-controlled rental, provided the little, where you should not step, some of the regulations and the rules. So
I can't. I'm just glad we don't have to deal with that. At least, I mean, both in Ohio and the greater Houston area, we just we set it at market rents, and the market tells us whether it's too high or too low.
Exactly. I think that's the way it should be. I get the reasoning for rent control, I guess. It's just to prevent, from people getting priced out of affordable housing. But
I think, though,
I mean, the government can do, I think, is that if they really wanted to do affordable housing, then maybe they could make it an eminent domain issue or something, where they just go and buy a tract of land and help a developer out.
Well, Fink, and I know we're getting a lot on rent control, but I think you're going to see that. I mean, we're recording this during the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, but I think you're going to see, and they've already done the studies, that there's a lot more demand outside the cities into the more rural and suburb areas. So, those rent control areas of San Francisco, LA, Chicago, New York that have a high dense population, I think you're going to see some of that relax because you're going to see these people getting driven out. A lot of people are moving from San Francisco to Austin. It's been a huge migration. So, the business friendly, the low taxes, I think that's going to definitely come into play over the next 5 to 10 years. You'll see that. I was listening to podcast the other day, and it was a massive commercial developer, and that's exactly what he was saying. He said he named off several different studies or statistics on the drive out of these high dense areas into more suburbs, other states, other areas.
And this is
they have
prior
more
COVID,
space.
right? That trend was already happening.
It was. I think it just got exacerbated by COVID, right?
That's interesting because I mean that was happening in the 80s, right? You had like those flight to suburban areas. So I wonder if that's just repeating a trend.
Well, if you're buying cash flow too, I mean, predominantly the cash flow areas are the suburban markets,
right?
Your Cadies, your Sugarland, your Pearland, the all that outside of town is where your cash flow. So that might be. I don't know about you, but I've seen. I mean, we just leased a property in less than 2 weeks. We've actually leased 2 properties in less than 2 weeks amid COVID and over the last month. So we haven't seen any slowdown.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Yeah, and I'm thinking. Well, Galveston didn't get hit, but I was thinking that if it did get hit a little bit from the hurricane Laura, there would have been an uptick in like Texas City or any of these other places, along that area. So,
but we might be seeing, kind of tied it into our conversation here. We might be seeing these evictions just get kicked down the road. The government stimulus, that $600 a month or $600 extra a week unemployment check, that's now $400. That's going to get cut here, who knows when, further and further to nothing. Then we could start seeing a spike in evictions and have to deal with this some more. We haven't had to deal with any. We've had 100% of rents collected to date. Thank God.
Awesome. That's good. Wood. Yeah. Well, that's the important part, I guess, screening your tenants as well. So
and I think that's probably what it goes back to. Think I had evicted a tenant that before I kind of got the process refined, when it was still rough, and he turned the property into a grow house. I mean, it was literally, we were doing I knew to do inspections. So we were, he moved in. I never heard from him. I just asked him, how's everything going or whatever. Oh, it's great. No worries. I said, hey, we're going to do our semi-annual inspection. Just come in, check underneath the sinks, check the gutters, look around, see if there's anything that needs to be done. And no response. Follow-up email, phone call, text, everything, no response. I go over there and the doors have written on them 24 plants. The HVAC, the ductwork was pulled out to have over all the plants and everything. The plants were gone, but it was just, you could see the dirt on the ground. They had left all sorts of stuff, and it was just like, I mean, we didn't have to do the eviction, but I didn't know, they weren't answering.
You had to do the cleanup and all the make ready. That probably.
Oh yeah, man. After just 6 months of doing the cleanup and make ready, they didn't do too much damage. It wasn't like, I don't think we had to repaint, but definitely had a significant cleanup and had to redo a lot of the duct work. But that was my first experience with an eviction or starting the eviction process.
And he didn't leave you with any oregano for you to use. Right?
That's what I said. I said, man, I would have been less likely to call the police.
Yeah, exactly. Man. Well, yeah. So let's talk about the eviction process. I mean, so you've done several. And
yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a necessary evil, part of owning rentals.
It is. I think one of the big things too is. I think people, and I was of this as well. I was nervous when I first started on evictions. Oh gosh, you hear it and you think it's this big monster, this big scary thing that you can't get your head around. But after you go through a couple, you almost get numb to it, because once you understand it and once you have your head around the process, it gives you comfort. At least it gave me, because I didn't really know. I'm like, oh my gosh, are they going to tear everything up? Is it going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months till I get anything? Are there any ramifications to them? What can I say? But once you break it down and look at it, it's a very simple process. It can be even simpler. Like we use Texas Eviction. I have no affiliate with them whatsoever, but that's who we use to help streamline the process.
Right.
And we basically contact them when we have issues or when we have the first sign of evictions, and they handle the process for us now. And the reason I do that, Fink, is because did a demand letter for a tenant, and I had something, or a notice to vacate, and I had some verbiage in there that wasn't right.
Yeah.
So they said, hey, we got to start this process over. We need to send a new notice to vacate, and we got to start the clock over. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. So I just said, if I keep a tenant in there for an extra 2 weeks or a month due to my stupidity, it has paid the $400 or $500 for that.
Yeah, and that's actually that is the intimidating part for me as well, right? I mean, I'm like, what? I don't know what the verbiage is like specifically. I mean, get out and please leave could mean two different things, you know?
You have to have the address on there. You have to have the tenant's name as it's written on the lease. I mean, and so there's all these other things that you and I don't know. We're not experts in that. I mean, you can Google it, but hell, I mean, you know, we can't believe everything we read on the internet.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So
that's a great point. And so you're basically outsourcing your evictions.
We are, man. It has really helped. We have, and again, we have won. I was telling you about it earlier. We have won all but one, and they left immediately after. And that was due, again, to a mistake on our behalf, not on Texas Evictions' behalf.
Right.
And that was about putting on, it was about having all the tenants on the lease and making sure that they were on the eviction paperwork, and it was a renewal, and there were some other kind of wonky things going on there, but we have streamlined that. So we just use them, man, and it makes it easy. But just to step back and say, what's the process? So, you know, due on the 1st is how all of our leases read. Even if they move in, want to move in on the 15th, you prorate it, and then you start, you know, with rent on the 1st, due on the 1st. Now, Texas Property Code, I think it was after September of last year, Fink, you cannot charge late fees until the 4th. So any new leases after September 2019, you have to give 3 days grace. It used to just be 2 days, so be due on the 1st, and with the with late fees starting on the 3rd. Now it's to the 4th. But, and I learned this in my Legal 1 or Legal 2 class, I can't remember. The guy was super friendly about tenants and evictions and the landlord process. And he said that you can actually send a notice out. I'm sitting there going, man, we can't do it till the 4th. And he said, no. It's due on the 1st. It's late on the 2nd, but you can only charge late fees on the 4th.
Right.
So I thought,
you can still send a late notice, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, but for me, I was thinking, well, I can't send a late notice till I send a late fee. No. That's not right. You can send a late notice immediately if you want.
Yeah.
So we send it on the 3rd. We send the late notice on the 3rd. So step 1, you got rent due on the 1st. You send the notice to vacate as the first piece. And again, there's bits and pieces of verbiage that need to be in there, and there's things you can and cannot say. I don't know all of it. I know you have to have the amount of arrears, the tenant's address, and you have to either send it via certified mail, or you have to affix it to the inside of the door of the property. Now, if the tenant has a dog, or you know there's other hazard that you can't get inside, then you can affix it to the outside, and you need to take a picture. And then there's stuff that has to be on the envelope, and you know, I was doing that.
It's like little stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and I was doing that, man, and it was just it was taking up a lot of time, and again, I was still making mistakes because it was like once we get to the eviction process, and I would kind of hand it over to these attorneys, they'd say, well, this wasn't right, or that wasn't right, or you were supposed to wait an extra day for this, and it's just like, just turn it over. Let it, you know, I mean, really, they charge us, I think it's $50 or $55 to send the notice to vacate. So it's like, you know, and we pass that on in the form of a late fee.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, so you handle that. So you get step 1, you got rent due, you send the notice to vacate on the 3rd. And then on the 10th, we let them know, or you can let your tenant know that, hey, we're filing the eviction, you know, and you can send stuff via email, or like I said, follow this, but if you actually end up going to court, you're going to want to follow the true process of certified mail or a letter with affixed to the door and what have you.
Now, let me stop you. Let me ask you, why are you waiting till the 10th to file eviction?
You have to give them a grace period. You have to give them 3 days. So the reason we wait till the 10th, so if you file it on the 3rd, it does not include holidays and weekends. So you can do it before the 10th, but it's just easier to do if you have several to do it on the 10th, where you have all of them. Does that make sense? Because it might fall on, you know, let's just say it falls on a Friday and Labor Day is Monday. So you can't do Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. So it starts Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
So the grace period is business days.
Correct. Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Well, interesting you mentioned that about the 10th because I actually took a continuing education CE class just a couple weeks ago on uh, the new tenant laws and stuff like that, and it was actually pretty interesting. I'm trying to pull it up right now. Um, and so one of the things he said was file before
The 10th.
the 11th or the 10th because
Was that with Lloyd Hampton?
yeah. Did you
Yep.
take that one?
Yep. Yep.
That yeah, okay. So yeah, so he basically was just saying file it basically on the 10th or 11th because you're just going to be in a better position as far as the line goes, you know?
Well, exactly. So notice to vacate's the first process, but you have to wait. It's a 3-day notice. So if you,
Yeah.
let's just say it's the 3rd, and you say, okay, and that's a Friday, and again, you have a Labor Day on a Monday. So the 4th, 5th, 6th, you can't. That doesn't count. And then you
Right.
have 7th, 8th, 9th. So
Yeah.
on the 10th is the first day you can actually file it. Now, you're
Gotcha.
right. You can do it before on some days, or some months it might fall where you can do it earlier. And Lloyd is sharp as a tack, man. I mean, very, very knowledgeable in this stuff. And if you could get it in ahead of time, because what most people do think is they'll wait until the 4th. They think they're doing their tenant a favor. They'll wait to the 4th or the 5th, and then they'll send the 3-day notice. And now they're behind all of us because we went in and filed it on the 3rd, like we were supposed to, or notice to vacate on the 3rd and got in on the 10th, 9th, or 10th.
Right.
So
Yeah.
everybody else is coming in the 10th, 11th, 12th, and we're ahead and get in earlier and get the eviction, get our hearing date earlier, which kind of steps us into the next piece, which is, so you get the notice to vacate, and then you file the actual eviction with the JP court or justice of the peace court.
Yeah.
Somebody told me, Fink, and I thought this was kind of crazy, that JP judges don't need a law degree. Is that what? Have you heard that?
I have no idea.
Well, I heard that from a friend. They said there was a new JP judge being appointed that was doing some wonky stuff, and they said they actually do not need a law degree. So somebody will have to fact check me on that. But I did hear that, and I thought that was kind of crazy.
That is kind of crazy.
Yeah, because they had it was actually Matt, our friend Matt, was Senate House
Yeah,
Buyers.
yeah.
Yeah, he said that they had a friend that went through an eviction, and the judge said it was something very clear in the landlord's favor, and the judge said, you have enough money, you can pay for that. And they said, well, and so they started digging into this judge, and it was a judge that had no law degree, no prior experience in this.
It's just, and I mean, this is probably going to sound really stupid because or ignorant, the fact that I don't know, but what are these the judges that get elected?
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know the
because they're
election
judges that
process
get
for these people.
elected, and I don't really
Yep.
know what they're getting, what they do, you know?
No, I think it's a very good question because, yeah, it kind of blows my mind on that. I thought that was really crazy that you can rule on law and not have a law degree.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. That's weird. Yeah, you would think that should be because I mean the law is so complex.
Oh
Like,
my gosh.
yeah,
Well, and and that if you're ruling, and not to get too far off, but if you're ruling based on what somebody can and can't do instead of what the law says, I think you're on a very slippery slope.
yeah, or what you feel. I mean, the fact that he says, "Oh, you have enough money." Oh, okay. Well, I mean, there's a lease in place, there's laws put in place that
Yep.
give rights to the tenant, that give rights to the landlord.
Yep.
And if the landlord did everything right, and then the
Yep.
tenant in default,
Yep.
then just the fact that whether he has $1 or $3 million really should, play into that fact because it's a contract. Right?
Exactly. I think it's a shame because, well, and I don't know if you've heard this, but when I started out managing my own properties, and that's how I got into the property management business. But it was, I heard, do not drive a nice car to go collect rent or talk to your tenants. Make sure you drive an old beater. And, and it is, you hear like, oh, well, Mr. Johnson, he needs his rent. Look at that old beater he's driving instead of he's driving a Porsche or Maserati. Yeah, he doesn't need rent. I mean, and who?
That's common sense.
I mean, it is. So it's kind of like, you don't want to give off that bad image. But like, where were we? So we had the eviction piece. So we have the notice to vacate on the 3rd. You wait 3 days. You try to get in. If you do it on the 3rd, you'll get in ahead of everybody if you file after, those 3 days, not including holidays and weekends. Then you file the eviction with the JP court, Justice of the Peace Court. You got to make sure you file on the right one. There have been cases dismissed because you file on the wrong JP court. They will set a hearing date. Sometimes, man, I've been in very quickly, within 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes, closer to a month. Again, I've only done about a half a dozen, so I'm not, in the thousands club. But some of these, that's why I use Texas Eviction, because they do thousands of them. But so then they'll get you a court date, and they'll get that notice to the tenant, and it'll be an official notice. That's usually, if you haven't heard from your tenants, that's when you'll get the call, or you'll get an email or something from them saying, oh, hey, we saw this notice. Oh, sorry, we were out of town, or our phones broke, or God knows what. It's all sorts of crazy, excuses. And then they want to work with you, and then you have to make a decision. I do not. I don't like to play games with that, Fink, because just like we were talking, if you start messing around with the process and they end up screwing you again, or that you don't follow the process properly, or you kind of deviate, you accept a partial payment. Now you have to restart the whole eviction process. Right. That was something else. You cannot accept partial payments throughout this whole thing. Once it goes on the 3rd, the 3rd to the 10th is whatever you want to do. But once you file that, if you accept a payment, then you are restarting the clock. If it's for $5, you're restarting the clock. So,
and that's including late fees too, right?
Correct. So you can only file the eviction once you file it is only rent. You can't actually add late fees into the filing. So it doesn't matter if you have a $500 in late fees. They're just saying what's the rent that they haven't paid, or how much in back rent do you have. So once they pay $5 or $50 or whatever, it kind of starts the clock over. So you want to make sure, if you tell them, if you guys want to stop this, you need to all my fees. So your the late fees, your fee for whether it's Texas Eviction or another company you use, or whatever else you have in it, you need to say, no, you need to pay rent plus late fees plus attorney fees of this. That's how you get out of this.
Right.
And so that's when they'll typically start working with you. Some people do cash for keys, Fink. I don't particularly like that, because you're basically rewarding them for bad behavior. And
that's a fair point.
And this is the thing too, Fink. So let's just say I have a tenant who's moving out and I have to evict them, and we don't go through the eviction process. They get that notice and they start the conversation and want to actually say, okay, hey, we want to pay, we want to do something. And I say, hey, I'll give you $300 cash to get out of my house. They're going to go and apply for rent at your place. You don't see, when you run a credit and background check and eviction, you don't see an eviction. So you think, oh, these are great tenants, great credit score, everything's peachy keen. They move into your property, and then in 6 or 8 or 12 months, they do the same thing to you. So I kind of look at it. Yeah, I look at it as kind of paying it forward. It's your dues. If you get a bad tenant, and I understand people fall on hard times, we will put payment plans in place if they're if they come to us and want to work before we start that eviction process.
Right.
We put payment plans in place. And if they want, once that eviction's been filed, if they want to pay all those fees and the rent before the court date, they can stay. They have to pay all that money, all the late fees and everything. And that's why that's why we do not do cash for keys. And that's why you got to be cognizant on accepting payments and whatnot. And I think ethically you need to file, so you're protecting, you're giving an honest, you're helping the next landlord find out what their tenant has been behind, and what they've been doing. And that's one of the other reasons I do. I just think it's kind of, I hate to say civil duty, but landlord to landlord duty,
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I never even thought about that. Because I've heard cash for keys all the time. Like, hey, that's the best way. Typically, the most effective way to protect your property from getting torn up. And then, maybe that tenant is in a bind and maybe they can't afford your place, but you can actually help them move down the road and maybe get into a property that they can afford better and, not have so much disruption. But
what do you think they're going to do?
Huh?
What do you think they're going to do with the next property?
Yeah, that's a good point. I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess people are like, "Oh, it ain't my property; they're out." But yeah, you're right. I mean, if yeah,
And that, because I know that I'm screening tenants that are in from other landlords, obviously, have been tenants before. And if they broke a lease or skirted out on rent and then applied to us and we do the full screening and we don't see anything, we don't know. Their
right,
landlord said, "Oh yeah, they're great. They're fantastic. Please take them." And lo and behold, they're going through an eviction. They just want them out. So, yeah, I do that. I kind of as a, I just think it's the right thing to do. I don't think anybody should, pull the wool over the next landlord's eyes, basically. And if everybody did that, then we have a better idea of the tenant pool as well. So
yeah. So whenever you do file eviction, does it automatically go on the credit report, or do you have to file
yes,
it yourself?
yeah. So, well, they'll get the eviction. So when I don't know what service or screening you use, Fink, but or whoever you uses we use an eviction screening as well as credit and background, and they'll pull all those. So once it gets filed, and it's not until it's deemed yes, it's in the landlord's favor, they have an eviction. After that,
Right.
it will show up, and it might take a week, it might take 2 weeks. So, again, that's why sometimes that immediate move or that first move, you won't see it. Um, and then you have the judgment. You can go, if it's a large sum of money, you can go to small claims court and get a judgment on them and put it on their credit report.
So what do you do if they move out before the eviction? They say, "All right, we're just gonna move out."
Great question. So if they move out, that's fine. That's actually a win-win-win. I don't have to pay cash for keys. They're out. We let the eviction go to hearing. We let it. I think most people will not go to the court hearing because
Right.
you can evict. I don't even think we talked about this. We're talking about eviction for non-payment of rent, but this can be for anything. They're smoking in the house. They're violating the lease in some sort
Right.
of way or fashion. The most common way to evict, or most common means of eviction, is for non-due rent or past due rent. So non-payment of rent, I should say. So if they don't pay and then they just leave, that's fine. We'll get in there and start changing locks and start the rehab process. Let it go to eviction and let them get an eviction on their record. But yeah, if they move out, that's actually kind of the best of both worlds. And if they like I said, on that 10th after you file, and then they get the official notice a few days later, that will typically stimulate conversation. They'll say, "Okay, oh my gosh, they're serious, right? This isn't mom and pop landlord just threatening us. This is legitimate. We have a court case. We have a court hearing date. We need to get serious with
Right.
this." So they'll either contact you and want to work something out, or they'll leave.
Right.
And that's a part of our process, is to go in, obviously want to work with the tenants where we can. And then if we don't hear from them, we always try to go the day before the hearing and see if they're still on the property. The majority of tenants, I don't know the percentage, Fink, but I'm sure the figures are out there, do not show up to the court date, their hearing date.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the odds of you winning are pretty high. Again, if you're doing, especially for non-payment of rent, they're pretty high. But yeah, if they move out, that's a win-win-win. Once the eviction, if they do go to the eviction and you win, the court will award you a writ of possession, is what it's called. And that is 5 days after that date, the tenant will need to be vacated. If they do not, the constable, which, if you're watching this video not from Texas or just moved, that's just a type of police in the area. I don't know exactly what their jurisdiction is. Think when I heard that we had sheriffs, constables, state highway patrolmen, I was
I'm
like,
still trying to figure it out. Yeah, I gave up on trying to figure it out a long time ago.
so the constable will actually come and remove them from the property
Yeah.
after 5 days. They will not remove them if it's inclement weather or maybe during a hurricane, but they will literally come and have the authority to remove their property from the property.
Yep.
So they'll just help them move out. You're there, you change the locks and do everything. And that's the end of it. They have an eviction on their record. They're out of your property. The only other way, and like I said, tenants are sometimes fairly elusive. So if you file an appeal, that could kind of start some of the clock over. But I'll be honest with you, Fink, I've never had to do it, so I'm not real familiar on the appeals process.
Yeah.
I have heard that it's just like another court date, so it might be 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then you go through the court date again, and if they award, it's the same thing, then a writ of possession, and then the constable will come and remove them after 5 days.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, isn't there some kind of so after you get that writ of possession, 5 days go past, you call out the constable. I think what 24 hours. Within 24 hours they show up or something.
The constable comes and gives them a notice, and then within 24 hours they have to be out. If they're not out, then they come in and remove them. So the constable, they try to, I think, Fink, if you look at it, when people talk about, man, I got to get this tenant out, this is the legal fastest way to get tenants out.
Yeah.
I mean, you can I've heard people tearing doors off. I've heard people of doing some crazy stuff, shutting utilities off. You cannot do that. You cannot take off doors. So if you want to get the tenant out as quickly as possible, you got to follow this eviction process. Yeah. If you think about it, if you give them a notice to vacate on the 3rd, you file 9th, 10th, and you get a court date 2, 3, 4 weeks after that, you could, really only lose about 2 months of rent. That's total, especially getting it released. If they don't do a major damage to the property, just kind of getting it fixed up and re-rented, you're looking about 2 months of rent. Again, if you short step in some of these steps and accept a partial payment, or do the demand letter yourself, and when you get into the court date, they say, oh my gosh, this says XYZ and it should have been this, or you're in the wrong JP court. Now you're starting the clock all over again. So now you got to file again and start the whole thing over. So I think the process, if you think about it, is very fair. We give them ample notice to vacate or pay rent. Then you go to the eviction. Then you get a court date. Then the judge says yes. Okay, you got 5 days from there. For the writ of possession. Then the constable comes and gives them 24 hours, and then they'll literally. It's free moving service. They'll help them pull their stuff out.
And the tenant gets the opportunity to go to the hearing and state their case too.
I have heard some horror stories, Fink, about landlords who don't take care of tenants, who they do some unethical things, and I 100% think that this process is a way for them as well to prosecute those bad guys and gals.
Yeah.
So I think it's if they appeal, they get to stay in there too. But that's kind of the eviction process as a whole. If there's some common mistakes that we were talking about earlier, I would say partial payments is a very, very, very big one. How they deliver the notice to vacate, you can't just affix it to the door. Yeah, verbiage and where you put it, that's another big one. I think a mistake is doing a cash for keys. That's just my opinion. Every case is a little different, but again, I think you're just hurting that next landlord or next 5 landlords, because most people, I can't say all, but most property management companies or landlords, an eviction is a deal breaker. And I have noticed the people I deal with evictions that have had evictions are repeat offenders. So, but yeah, I would say those two or three things, Fink, would be the biggest mistakes that folks make. And then, not following the whole process, trying to short circuit, steps, just let it ride. Don't accept partial payments, go to court, do things the right way. I don't think people do this as much anymore about taking doors off or shutting utilities off, but you cannot do that. Right. You will you'll get serious trouble.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't think you can't even, you can't even change utilities now if it's not under your name. I have a house where I was trying to get CenterPoint, the infrastructure, owner of the power lines, to come in and trim the trees that are basically touching the power lines.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, this is, me watching out for you guys and also for my own property. So I call them and I'm like, hey, I own this house. I would like to get this tree trimmed. I think you guys should do it because it's power lines. They're like, okay, well, what's the name? And I give the name and they're like, we don't see your name on the database. I'm like, well, I'm the owner. And they're like, okay, well, please have whoever's account is under. But I'm the owner. I don't have an account with you guys for that house, but I have the deed. And they're like, sorry. I'm like, what? What is it? It makes no sense, And so,
I guess it's good and bad, And if you didn't like the tree on your neighbor's property, you just call and tell them, hey, cut it down on the owner,
Yeah, but the tree's on my property. They. Yeah,
I know. I'm just saying. I guess somebody, if you know the neighbor's name, right, and you could just say, yeah, I'm.
That's true. That's true.
No neighbor.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I think it would be hard, Fink, and I don't think a lot of people do it. I've heard horror stories, and I think it is, it is unfortunate. Some tenants can be real pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate on both sides, but this is unfortunately, when you hear eviction, I used to think of a big scary monster as well. It's just like, oh shit, this thing is going to be, it's going to be long, it's going to be drawn out, it's going to suck. But once you understand and just break it down, you're like, hey, this is the fastest legal way to get a tenant out of the property. And that's, as long as you keep that in the back of your mind, whether it sounds long or not, depending upon where you're from, it might sound very short. Some places, maybe it sounds very long, but this is what you have to do to legally remove a tenant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, that's good to know, man. Well, yeah, thanks for hopping on the call. I think unless you have anything else to add, I've got no questions.
No, Fink. I mean, I would just say, to reiterate, don't be afraid of evictions. I think for all the landlords out there, the legal side of it, I'm not an attorney. I don't practice law, and that's why I leave it to my friends at Texas Eviction. I'm not an affiliate of them. I don't get anything, but we have just found them to be very easy to work with and help us through this process and take some of that burden off of landlords. So don't think the eviction process is a big scary thing, and just make sure you're doing the proper tenant screening, like you mentioned earlier, Fink.
Yeah.
That is going to prevent all this stuff from happening. Outside of that, we're a property management company. If you need any help or just have any questions or anything, emersonpropertymanagement.com. And, there's a lot of free information on there. We also have a YouTube channel where we give away a lot of free information. So anything we can do to help any other landlords, or if you just want to hop on a call and chat, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, man. And I'll put your website in the description. And then also texasevictions.com. Is that their website?
That's exactly who I use, man. And like I said, there's no affiliate there. I just like to refer good companies. They've really taken care of us. There's great communication down there.
Okay, awesome. And if you're a landlord watching this and you've decided that you don't even want to deal with the eviction, both Cameron and I buy houses. So if you want to call either one of us, we'll talk to you and see if maybe we can help you out. So, Well, Cameron, thanks for hopping on board. It was good. I definitely learned some stuff. And if I do have to have an eviction, I'm definitely going to call Texas Eviction, because like you, I don't want to, miss a word. Demand instead of please or whatever. So I'm not going to play that game.
Nope.
So,
okay, man. Well, hey, I appreciate it too. Thanks for having me on, Fink.
Yeah, for sure. Take care.
See you, buddy.
Yeah.